Fugazi proudly uses read.cash to help distribute our content. Head out to read.cash / @CoinFugazi, all one word, and check out how we're incorporating the platform. Then also check out how people and businesses from all over the world are using crypto as a currency, rather than just speculating, to demonstrate the power of peer-to-peer electronic cash. Tip, comment, blog, join communities, and so much more. That's read.cash. Read.cash.
Of course, that's a Fugazi.
All right?
That's a Fugazi? How do you know it's a Fugazi? You looked at it for 2 seconds.
What, it's a fake?
Yeah, I know what a Fugazi is.
It's all a Fugazi. You know what a Fugazi is?
No, Fugazi. It's a fake.
Yeah, Fugazi. It's a wazi, it's a woozy, it's a fairy dust. It doesn't.
Coin Fugazi.
Coin Fugazi.
Coin Fugazi. Coin Fugazi. Coin Fugazi. Coin Fugazi.
Welcome to the Coin Fugazi podcast. I'm your host, C. Edward Kelso, and what follows is an in-depth interview with Jonathan Toomim, who has become a central figure in, I guess, what we're now calling the Bitcoin Cash or BCH Civil War of 2020. This is our conversation in its entirety. I have taken liberty to divide it into 4 chunks, 4 separate standalone episodes. So if you're more interested in one topic than you are in the other, or if you want to skip ahead, you can check out those other episodes as well. Without any further ado, here is Jonathan Toomim on the Coin Fugazi
for his
podcast.
work as a junior dev on Hearn's Bitcoin XT, and then for co-founding Bitcoin Classic, and really a big block advocate, and someone that, again, people in the space, in the know, have a great deal of respect for. Of late, he's become, I wouldn't say the center of the controversy, but he's certainly in there with regard to Bitcoin Cash and everything that's going on with it.
I'd say maybe the match that started the fire.
He's sort of the John Brown of our current civil war here, and so the Harper's Ferry is the DAA. We'll get into all that, but first, I'm being rude. Thanks, Jonathan, so much for taking time out to speak to me.
My pleasure.
All right, so let's get on with it. I think before we get into the development stuff, I was pretty impressed by your work early on when, if memory serves, in the COVID crisis here in the United States, we were getting information from all the top dogs, at least government officials, that if anything, masks were either not important, or it wasn't a big deal, or give it over to healthcare professionals. And I remember you, because I follow you on Twitter, all of a sudden kind of popping into this idea. You really took to the mask thing early, right? Yeah,
I mean, there's a few ways of framing this. One way of framing it is that I'm just naturally anti-authoritarian. And so, whenever the authorities said that masks didn't work, I just had to tell them that they were wrong. But another way of framing it is that, see, I'm actually not a developer. I know a lot of people think this, but
okay.
My degree is actually in molecular biology. I'm a neuroscientist by training. And so when I saw the things that the CDC, the WHO were saying about masks, I dug into research, and I saw that that the research did not support the position that they were taking. The research also did not quite support the opposite position that I wanted to take.
Right.
That basically what we had was an instance in which we had an absence of evidence. And they were saying that in the absence of evidence, we should conclude that they don't work. Whereas my position is that the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. There's no evidence of an absence of effect of masks. And if anything, there was circumstantial evidence of a very, very strong effect, protective effect of masks. And the size of that effect was exactly what you would predict from the physics studies. basically like for surgical masks, there was a study done in Australia that looked at how likely a parent was to get sick with influenza if they were caring for a child who had influenza, if they were or were not wearing a surgical mask or a P2 mask, which is like the equivalent of an N95 in Australia. And from physics simulations, we can see that for 0.1 or 0.3 micron particles, about 70-ish% of the particles are blocked if you're inhaling through the mask by a regular cheap surgical mask. So that means about 30% get through. And what they found in this study was that giving masks to people did not protect them from the virus. And that was their main outcome measure. But if you looked at whether the people actually wore the masks, only about 30% of them wore the masks. And of those 30% who wore the masks, they were 74% less likely to get the virus. They were 74% protected against influenza. And that latter finding was statistically significant, but basically this is what's called a post hoc analysis.
Right.
And the standards of evidence-based medicine say that post hoc analyses are not trustworthy because they're susceptible to p-hacking. They're susceptible to this thing where you just do a bunch of comparisons afterwards and you only report the comparisons that ended up being statistically significant. And there's a bunch of other studies that are similar, that like either had very low adherence rates or small sample sizes or both. And so like in most of these cases, most of these studies, there just wasn't strong evidence saying that they didn't work. There was like some circumstantial evidence saying that they might work really well, they might not work at all, we don't really know. And ultimately, when the virus came, when COVID came, the scientists who were making these public statements were not the scientists who had actually done the basic research, and they weren't aware of all these quirks in the research, all of these caveats and reasons why the research was inconclusive. So like the CDC was citing several studies that had somewhat strong evidence in favor of a very large effect size, but they cited it in such a way to say that masks didn't work. Like there was a Jefferson from 2008, one of the papers from Hong Kong showed that 68% of people who wore masks during SARS-1 in 2002, 2003 were protected from the virus in a correlational study. But the CDC cited this study as was it CDC? Anyway, somebody cited this study as showing that surgical masks are no worse, or sorry, N95 masks are no better than surgical masks. Like there was no statistically significant difference between the two. And then they also claimed elsewhere that surgical masks were ineffective. That meant, by extension, that you would expect for N95 masks to be ineffective,
right,
unless they were fit tested. And they had like this whole glass house of conclusions that were built on these very rigorously or very like precise logical connections that ignored the uncertainty in the underlying findings and ignored the difference between a non-positive finding and a finding of no effect. Like there's, just because you don't see anything doesn't mean that it's there, but you're just like, like Luke Skywalker with the blaster covers over his head while waving his lightsaber around. Just because you don't see it doesn't mean it's not there.
Yeah,
so,
and well, the reason that I bring it up in the context of our talking about things Bitcoin Cash today is I think it highlights a few things, and as you already alluded to, sort of your anti-authoritarian streak, but also what an empirical guy you are. So you're just one of these dudes who will just deep dive into a subject, as we're hearing now, just comb through everything, come to a conclusion, and then you act on it. And so you take all this information, even though and this is long before government actually starts mandating masks in some cases, and fining people for not wearing them. So at this point, they're at the absolute opposite side of that equation, literally encouraging people not to use them or not buy them or hoard them or whatever. And so you take all the information you've done, and what happens next?
Yeah, I mean, just back up a little bit. The anti-authoritarian thing, that was a joke. I'm not actually anti-authoritarian. I'm a authoritarian. And so like what I do is I I look at the evidence and I make decisions for myself based on what I think the evidence says. And then if I find that there's an authority figure who disagrees with the evidence, that starts to like get me a little bit like it's there's somebody wrong on the internet kind of phenomenon, but times 10. Because it's not just somebody wrong, it's the person who's making the decisions for everybody. And I consider that, you know, when there's a massive group decision that's being made that's incorrect, I consider that to be a much bigger problem than when there's a couple of people who are making the incorrect decision. So yeah, so when I find something that I think is an underappreciated truth, that tends to be what I fixate on and what I try to do. And this is just kind of always been the what makes me tick and what motivates me. It's always been finding these things that we as a group, as a society, as individuals should be doing better or doing more of.
Yeah, and yeah, I can definitely, you know, see that thread just through our conversations and me watching your work from afar. So what do you do with this information with the mask? Just to kind of put a bow on this particular segment. You get this information, but you actually do something with it. You don't just sit there and postulate and pontificate. You actually turn it into a form of activism.
So I try to figure out, given this information, what can I do? Can I do something personally that will make a difference? Can I convince other people to change their behavior in a way that will make a difference? And like, what's going to be the path that I can take in order to make the greatest impact? And with the masks thing, I saw two paths. One was be aware, sarcasm coming, social media warfare. You know, I could go on and publish either statements on Twitter or on Reddit, or I could talk to my friends on Facebook and convince them of the importance of masks, so I could write articles on it. And I started to actually do some research, hoping to turn it into a peer-reviewed article or preprint by going around and collecting YouTube videos of people walking on the streets in different cities at different times and measuring how many of them were wearing masks and what type of masks they were wearing, so that we could do a correlation to see if that explains some of the variance in how quickly the disease spread. So I did this for Japan, and I've got like a graph of the mask use over time in Japan. Did a little bit of this for China, did a bunch of it for New York City, and I've got these actually up on one of our websites on MaskWatch, maskprotectors.org/maskwatch, if anybody's curious. But I never like got it totally refined, and eventually the New York Times did something very similar and published a much better map of mask usage. So I was really happy to see that get out. But what else could I do? Well, one of the issues in like March, April, was that, first, one of the things that happened was that when the virus hit China, China ran out of masks. And so China started asking everybody all around the world, hey, can you send us masks? And this was done on personal levels mostly, but also through like the Chinese embassies and through networks of Chinese Americans or Chinese nationals who are living abroad. And one of my friends, I used to live in China for a while, by the way, one of my friends from Shenzhen started doing this. She started getting and organizing shipments of masks from the United States to China. And then finally China got the virus under control, and then it started spreading elsewhere. It started spreading in first Italy and into Iran, and then Spain, and then the United States and the UK. And the United States had most or a lot of its supplies, a lot of its commercial warehouse supplies depleted to be sent to China. So now we had no masks. And that caused huge problems in the hospitals and in the medical setting, because they just didn't have the N95s that they needed, or even the surgical masks. Those were short for a while too. They didn't have the masks they needed in order to keep their workers safe. And this was exacerbated by a culture that emphasized single usage. Like they would use one N95 per patient visit and then throw it away. So a mask might be used for like 15 minutes and then discarded. And that's fine when you only have one patient every week that needs that level of protection, or one patient a day that needs that level of protection, because then you're just using one mask a day. But once you start getting wards filled with COVID patients and you have to visit maybe 50 patients a day, you go through your mask supply pretty darn quick. So, so that was a problem, the overconsumption. There was also the problem of the undersupply. So I tried to tackle both aspects. Both aspects. I did some research and I found that, hey, you can sanitize masks very easily using a toaster oven or using 50 degrees Celsius to 90 degrees Celsius dry heat or moist heat, could be steam, for somewhere between 30 minutes and 60 minutes. And so I started supplying some doctor friends with toaster ovens and with instructions for how to do this. I also started supplying them with KN95 masks that I imported from China and surgical masks. And the goal was to actually try to put half of the masks on medical personnel and half the masks on super spreaders or potential super spreaders, like bus drivers or store clerks or anybody who's in contact with either a lot of people or a highly vulnerable population. And we just never were able to get to that part because the desperation from the medical staff was so great. So yeah, we got something like 15,000 masks total.
Wow.
And we're distributing them. The last, what was it? 5,000 plus 4,000, last 9,000 arrived pretty much right when the mask shortage ended. And so like we started getting reports from the people who previously had been desperate for masks saying, actually, we're good now. And so that was around late April, early May, I think, that things started to get caught up. So at that point, like it seemed that the for-profit supply chain had caught up, and so we started tapering off our operations.
Super interesting, and I find it a really nice, again, look into your way of thinking and how you approach the world. I think some of this debate that we're having in the Bitcoin Cash community roughly parallels, I guess, how you think versus, say, the more axiomatic. Well, I'll leave it like that, and so we can get into the next segment here. But if people are wondering why the heck is he belaboring this COVID stuff and masks, and why I'm asking you so much about it, it's again to kind of highlight how you work and what your modes of operation are. So what prompted us to talk today, in large part, was an unusually scathing essay from you, at least in recent years. And it comes out of read.cash, and it is titled Dark Secrets of the Grasberg DAA, and I'll link to it in the show notes. This is Jonathan Toomim putting on I guess a clinic, for lack of a better phrase, or term, where he goes into the technology, he goes into the empirical side, he names names, it's quasi-polemical, he gives a course of action, and I think it's going to be I guess what happens going forward. I think this is going to be something a lot of people refer to as a transitional document, as something that changed the debate and either elevated it or however this shakes out historically. But I was again not surprised, just really impressed with how you laid things out. You're a natural teacher. I think that's evident here with the essay. But let's go back a little bit, and I want to warn listeners, because the way you've just heard, Jonathan again leaves no stone unturned. If we can, I don't want to get too lost into DAA and too lost into Grasberg, but it would not be, I guess, complete if we didn't talk a little bit about it. So Bitcoin Cash has had sort of an ongoing issue with its difficulty adjustment algorithm, and that it inherited, I guess. And with oscillations, miners gaming the system, and essentially it's a security issue, it's a profitability issue. There's a whole bunch of things going on there, and you and a few others sort of take this issue by the horns, led by yourself and I know Mark Lundeberg. And I wanted to say it started in May, but in our pre-show talk here, you were saying that you guys started working on this, at least behind the scenes, back in January, right?
I did say that in the pre-show, but now that you're like phrasing it this way, I would say that it actually started in around September or October of 2017.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, this has been going on for a really long time.
Yeah.
And it's, you said that this was the DAA that we inherited. Just to address that, that's false. This is not the DAA that we inherited. The BTC DAA is actually quite good for the case of a single majority coin that has basically all of the hash rate. It's not perfect, but like in that case, it performs the job that it was designed for quite well. But as soon as you have multiple coins sharing the same hash function and sharing the same machinery, there is an oscillation from the slow responsiveness of that algorithm. And so you get all of the hash rate going on one chain for 2016 blocks, and then the difficulty goes way up on that chain, so then you get all the hash rate piling up onto the other one, and so forth. And it just keeps going back and forth, and it's a total mess.
Right.
So before Bitcoin Cash was created, Amaury recognized this problem. It's actually a very well-known problem because Bitcoin Cash is not the first time that two coins have shared the same difficulty adjustment algorithm. There have been tons of script-based Litecoin derivatives that have run into this problem before. So yeah, Amaury knew that it existed, that the problem existed, and he decided to do something about it. But most of what he'd heard about the problem was actually having heard it from that information being filtered through other Bitcoiners. And the Bitcoiners didn't know the specifics of the problem. They just knew that, like, yeah, if you have two basically like people will all mine on one chain at one time, and there's a chance for the minority chain to die from having too high of a difficulty. So he coded a quick and dirty fix. That quick and dirty fix did prevent Bitcoin Cash from dying immediately, but it resulted in nasty oscillations. It resulted in basically an average block time of about 320 seconds instead of 600 seconds for 3 months. And so that was less than ideal. So the next DAA was proposed, well, there were 3 proposals in October-ish of 2017, and Amaury's was one of them. That was the algorithm CW144. And then there was a WT algorithm from Tom Harding, and then one from, I think, Cupid-chan. And of those 3 algorithms, the one that got chosen was Amaury's, and Amaury made that decision. And it worked a lot better. It immediately returned the blocks to 600 seconds on average, 601.7. And for the time, the oscillations went away. But they didn't stay gone. And in the process of choosing that algorithm, a lot of people got really pissed off because a lot of people knew that this algorithm was inherently unstable. Mangerian, for example, Amaury's right-hand man at Bitcoin ABC, wrote an article on October 30th saying, hey, this CW144 algorithm is unstable, we should use WT instead. And 14 days later, the CW144 algorithm was activated, despite Mangerian's protests. And Tom Harding got frustrated about his algorithm being looked over, and a lot of other people also had problems with that. But for the time being, it worked fine. So people kind of they did a little bit more research to come up with a couple of other good options, and then it sort of lay fallow until around October of 2019. And something else that you said was that miners have been gaming the algorithm. And that actually, that is not true. And this is a little bit of a surprise to people because they see that miners are switching their hash rate back and forth. But what's going on is that miners are just mining whichever coin is most profitable at any given moment. They're not trying to generate the oscillations. They're just trying to respond to them.
I see what you're saying. Uh-huh.
Yeah, and they're following the incentives that are laid out for them. And if they didn't, they would lose about 6% of their revenue. And I know this because I'm a miner, and I
Right.
chose not to do this switch algorithm mining, and I lost 6% of my revenue for like a year. And that's fine. You know, I had pretty good profit margins because we had ridiculously low electricity rates until April, but still, like there shouldn't be that need for miners to choose between making an extra 6% and not destroying the usability of the coin and the user experience. Like it shouldn't be, Bitcoin Cash should not be built on the principle that miners are altruistic and willing to lose money. That's just not what we're standing for.
Right.
So yeah, in October, I think it was September 30th-ish, a new pool started using this switch mining strategy of mining whichever coin is the most profitable, and not just sticking to BTC. Prior to that, they'd just been mining BTC all the time. And this new pool had a lot of hash rate. They had something like 10% of the total BTC hash rate. So they had several times as much hash rate as BCH usually has. And that caused the oscillations to get really bad really fast. And in October, people started complaining about their transactions taking 6 hours to confirm on exchanges. And why is this? I thought that Bitcoin Cash was supposed to be fast. What's going on? This is a terrible user experience, etc. It was, a big thing, a big thorn in our side. But a few weeks later, the problem sort of settled down again. Not exactly sure why. Maybe one of the pools changed their policies a little bit. They tweaked their algorithm. Maybe, who knows? But then it got bad again in January of 2020. It got around like January 22nd. And around that time, the hash rate would drop down to about 3 exahashes for most of the day. And then for a few hours a day, they would jump up to about 23 exahashes. They were increasing by a factor of 8 over the course of a day. And so we would frequently see an hour and a half, 2 hours between blocks, instead of the typical 10 minutes or so. And yeah, then we again had users complaining about their long confirmation times. And as you mentioned, I'm a bit of a teacher, so whenever I see people asking questions or complaining about things, I like to just go in and write an extensive essay that's about 10 times as long as it usually has to be, explaining to them the details and the motivation and like the background for why their transactions take a long time. And in so doing that, on one of these cases, I just thought about this and said, this sucks. This needs to be fixed. And so I spent the next couple of weeks researching the issue and trying to figure out ways to fix it. So before Bitcoin, before COVID, before a lot of stuff, I used to make biofeedback devices. I used to make a device that measures brain activity using near-infrared light, called a near-infrared spectroscopy device. And in that process, I had some familiarity with filters, with building digital and analog filters. And so I thought, hey, this problem of trying to estimate the current hash rate in order to set the difficulty is a lot like just filtering a signal. So I had some ideas that I wanted to try for how to improve on that, on what we currently had in order to make it more responsive while still having the same noise filtering out capability. And I had these grand ideas, and when I started doing some research, I noticed that all the grand ideas that I had already been tried, and they all pretty much worked. And there wasn't any unknowns about this. Like, the solution was out there, it was tested, it was deployed in many other altcoins. And they had names. Like one of the filters that I was thinking about, it's like, oh, I've got this great FIR filter, finite impulse response filter that I made for the UI, for the software on the computer that did this and this and this. And then I look into it and it's just a LWA. It's just a linearly weighted moving average. That's all it is. It's like known for ages. And then I had this other thing, an IME. It's like, yeah, that's something that pretty much everybody invents. And so then it came to the point of wondering, if these solutions are all known, why don't we have them deployed? And unfortunately, so I did some simulations. I tested to make sure that they would work. I published those in a video on February 27th. And when I did so, I got the answer to that question. The reason they hadn't been deployed was Amaury Sachet, plain and simple.
And
Mark Lindeberg.
Don't forget your train of thought, your video and so on, and the answers to that fundamental question. I just want to define for listeners who may not know, and I don't know how they couldn't know this, but let's say they stumble into the podcast. The name Amaury keeps coming up. It's Amaury Sachet, and he, of course, is lead developer at Bitcoin ABC, which is, for all intents and purposes, kind of the dominant client or implementation at this time, at least. And so, I'm sorry, pick it up from there. Video and reaction to your video.
Yeah, until this time, at least. Bitcoin ABC, I think, is no longer that. But anyway, yeah, so he's been the benevolent dictator of Bitcoin ABC, as he titles himself. And there had been several times in the past when people had tried to fix the DAA, fix the oscillations, even before they happened. And he had mildly opposed them or flatly opposed them, or just stonewalled them, or recommended that they look into some other ideas like bonded mining, which he thinks would solve the underlying problem instead of putting a band-aid over like the symptoms, or there was always just stuff that he put in the way of actually getting it done. And in particular, Mark Lindeberg had proposed ASSERT, the algorithm that I ended up using, in fall of 2019, and it got that same treatment. And so we could have had this DAA a year ago, or at least 6 months ago, but we didn't because of him. So I thought, okay, this is unfortunate. This is a roadblock. I still want to get this fixed, but this just means that when I do get this thing fixed, I have to put in enough work so that I can convince Amaury. And I also have to make sure that if for some reason he, opposes it, that it still gets fixed even without him. So that was really like the defining moment of the task for me. And then COVID happened, because that was February. COVID happened, I started doing masks, then that calmed down, and around May, I started to think about this, and I remembered, oh yeah, I need to fix this. The hard fork, the non-hard fork, I should say, the IFP thing had just fizzled out, and Bitcoin Cash was now starting to get its attention back for fixing new issues for the next hard fork. So I thought, hey, if I'm going to do this, it's now or never. August 15th is the future freeze date. So late May, I started diving back into the research. I tried to spruce up my simulation thing, which, by the way, I had derived from the 2017 work that Hubichan had done. It's basically not even my simulator. I just added a nice fancy UI onto it and some other stuff. But I spruced that up. I added some new algorithms. I started adding some formal parameters, formal test scenarios and outcome measures so that I could quantitatively compare algorithms. And I started searching for the best, the most perfect DAA that I could possibly find, so that I could be sure that basically there would be nothing to object to, that nobody would be able to say, hey, this other thing is what you really should have done. And like, then you have two competing proposals, and then people can't agree, and then it doesn't happen. That was what I wanted to avoid. And yeah, started working with a couple of other guys. I started working with Scott Roberts, also known as Zowie, who has been doing DAAs for altcoins for like 6 years or something like that.
Oh, wow.
It's his white whale, basically, his obsession. And then also talked a little bit with Tom Harding and Jacob Eliasov, And Jacob Eliasov was one of the actual first inventors of the assert algorithm, although it wasn't called that then. But Jacob Eliasov and Tom Harding were both working with exponential moving average EMA type algorithms, which assert is and which WTAMA is, and looked at 4 main algorithms that seemed to perform well. I also looked at like a dozen others that did not at all do very well. And within those 4 algorithms, I tested the performance. I looked at like the code complexity, looked at how long it takes to compute each difficulty, and ultimately it came down to 2 things, WTAMA and assert. And between the 2, it looks like assert would be the simpler to implement. So I picked that and tried a few different variations of it, different integer approximations, and ultimately I just found that the one that Mark Lundeberg had come up with a year ago was like as good as it can get. It was the best trade-off that we could possibly get.
And importantly, Mark Lundeberg, Mark B. Lundeberg, I guess, physicist by training, worked hand in hand with Amaury as an independent dev for Bitcoin ABC on a few of the upgrades. It brought in a mild version of Schnorr signatures and so on, and kind of a celebrated guy. He winds up leaving over the infrastructure funding plan for Bitcoin Cash, the IFP, in a bit of a protest after a dark night of the soul. And so that I just want to put that in context. So you guys basically arrive at something that approximates what is being proposed now as ACERT, and pick it up from there.
Yeah, so it's kind of funny because several people have ended up coming at basically the same conclusion. Mark did, Jacob Eliasov did, and a couple of researchers at, I forgot which university, Imperial College London, I think, also came up with this basically the same algorithm. These 3 teams, or these 4 teams, if you include me, all came to the conclusion that the optimal algorithm seemed to be assert, and that the only question was, how do you approximate it without using floating point math? And so the goal was to get that through. And Mark he did have the problem that I saw of trying to get it through Amaury. And Mark also left over the IFP because of Amaury. And that's, I think, like a separate side to this issue, that there was A, this specific problem that needed to be fixed, and B, a long history of other problems that hadn't gotten fixed for the same problem, for the same reason that this problem was difficult to fix. So yeah, that was the background. So I published my sample implementation of assert, as well as a informal specification document and thorough test simulation essay on July 8th, and people kind of liked it. It is currently the 2nd most tipped article on read.cash.
Right.
I think I've received something like $3,500 or like 12 Bitcoin Cash over that one article. And yeah, people got really excited about it. And they said, hey, this is great. We're going to actually fix this problem. And it's going to improve confirmation times. It's going to make the mining ecosystem more fair. It's going to improve decentralization. And it has very few downsides. And among the people who did not say that was Bitcoin ABC, and specifically Amaury Shea. They kind of just didn't say that much. They did talk with me a little bit, but it was very terse and circumstantial.
I remember
I should say.
It did lead eventually to the Future of Bitcoin Cash group, after you guys did an impromptu dev meeting, first, I think in May. It led to the
So I was not part of the May meeting. I did not join any dev meetings until July.
Oh, right, okay. But there was a dev meeting that might have been prompted by your work. And the Future Bitcoin Cash picks it up, and they have some links to Bitcoin ABC and Amaury. And so they are talking about it, but it is interesting that if I have to defend Amaury a little bit, just to provide a little bit of balance here, his excuse has been for years the funding problem and having the resources to tackle it and so on. And thus we get the IFP, thus we get all that other stuff. So it's kind of interesting there. But so it's hard to ignore because, as you say, your proposal is popular, and it's not just popular with fanboys like me who can be discarded or whatever, but it's popular with people in the know, and they're saying, hey, this is a great alternative. But the sort of dominant implementation at the time for Bitcoin Cash, Bitcoin ABC, is paying it almost no heed. And it seems to me that from an outsider's perspective, here you are kind of handing it to them on a silver platter. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, I was trying to do as much of the work for them as I could. I was trying to present something that they could look at and say, yes, this meets all of the requirements that we think a DAA fix needs to have, and this saves us a lot of work for having to develop it all ourselves. And yeah, I was hoping that they could see this and say, hey, thank you for getting out there and doing the work, and we'll work with you and make sure that it gets tested and stuff. I was hoping that they would be collaborative, but that wasn't what happened. And at first, it was kind of subtle stuff that they did that seemed weird, seemed off. Like the first thing that Amaury objected to was that I didn't have a problem statement. And he wanted to see a single problem statement to clearly define the problem before he would consider any solutions. Because if you don't have a problem statement, then who knows, maybe you're solving the wrong problem. And this had actually been something that he'd been talking about for a long time. There's a Reddit post of his from February 27th, from the response to my video, in which he said basically the same thing, and he listed out a bunch of different options, including bonded mining, which was one of his favorites, for how we might be solving the wrong problem, and we need to do a problem statement first to make sure that we are solving the right problem. And so it took a while before I got him to drop that point. Basically, my answer was that there isn't a problem statement. There are multiple problem statements. There are multiple problems that also all have to be simultaneously solved by the DAA. And the reason that they had not made any progress since May, since Karl Czerchowski, I think is how you pronounce his last name, since Karl had been working on this, he had been trying to do that problem statement, and he'd been coming up against a wall. He couldn't actually get that single problem statement that would satisfy everything. And I think that's because basically he'd been looking at it from the perspective of a reductionist and not from the perspective of an engineer. Like, if you look at it far.
Reductionist versus, sorry, I keep interrupting. Reductionist versus an engineer, put a pin right in there. In the background, what's happening underneath all this is that in response to the IFP, there is what was loosely termed by Bitcoin ABC as a protest movement going on, that many heavy hitters, developers, front and back end guys, protocol devs, and so on were coalescing around the Bitcoin Cash node implementation. And I think it was kind of dismissed in the beginning as I kept hearing hobby node being thrown around in terms like this. And then all of a sudden, it seems like the center of gravity was shifting towards the Bitcoin Cash node fellows, that group, and it started to gain a little bit of steam. So could it be that your proposal, and again, you set it up well in the sense that ABC seems to be an intransient figure. It just will not give in to what seems to be evident. but I'm still going to ask this question. Do you think that your proposal came at a time when, even though you weren't being political, at least I didn't see you as it, at first anyway, do you think maybe launching your DAA version with Lundeberg and those guys, do you think Sachet's sort of, I don't want to get into the psychological deconstruction. Do you think ABC's hackles were up, and so they were maybe too sensitive to kind of concede, since you were, I guess, somewhat aligned with the BCHN guys? Do you know what I'm asking?
Yeah. I get what you're going to. Yeah, and I think that there is. I think that was partially what was going on, and I was aware of that, and I had. So the background for that decision. So I by the way, the facts are that I did my sample implementation of my assert SRD3 algorithm in C++ based on the BCHN code, and the reason that I did that was roughly threefold. So I'd worked with ABC in the past. I had done some external stuff based on their code repository and some stress testing stuff based on their code. And I'd also fixed a bug or two. So I'd had some experience with how they did software development. I'd also had some experience with Bitcoin Unlimited. I was a member of Bitcoin Unlimited for quite a while as like a voting member. And I also had worked with their code a little bit. And I found that neither of those two organizations really worked for me. Like ABC was just way too hard to get anything done. Bitcoin Unlimited was way too easy to get anything done. And I wanted to find something else I wanted to see if there was something else that was more to my taste, just in terms of like code review process and degree of collaboration, degree of personal responsibility versus group responsibility, and culture fit. And so I thought around May, early May actually, that it might be fun to take one of my old projects that I'd written for ABC and that I had found was untenable for getting into ABC, and to see if I could get the BCHN guys excited about it. And so I proposed it, and lo and behold, they got excited about it. And I submitted a little bit of code that I had found got stuck in code review at ABC and just didn't really get anywhere because of like basically poor quality code review, inattentive code review. And that same code got a ton of attention on BCHN. Not only did I think 3 different devs look at that code and give me comments, but one of those devs saw a deficiency in my code and pointed it out to me, and then like there was a little bit of back and forth on that, and then he just decided to fix it for me. So he just took my code and developed a merge request or a pull request of his own and submitted a merge request onto my merge request to try to fix the problem that he himself had found. And like that really impressed me. Like no denying it, that was a very convincing factor. And so that was like part of the background for my decision to go with BCHN. They just did better code review than ABC did as far as I could tell. And it was a lot more fun as well to work with them. Then the other background is that BCHN had put into their mission statement or their fundraising plan the intent to fix the DA. That was one of their core goals. So I knew that I could expect a lot of support from them if I based my code on their repository. And like both of those points have been proven to be correct decisions. Like they have done a ton of work to help me with this, and a lot more than I would have expected, a lot more than I had even hoped for. At some points, like actually basically since July 15th, Free Trader has been doing more dev work on both the C++ code and on the formal specification than I have. He just grabbed it and started running with it, and I've been trying to stay caught up with him. So that has been amazing. I did know that ABC was going to see this as a threat, I guess. I think they shouldn't see it as the threat, but I understand that they do. I think that basically it's a misplaced fear, but what I was hoping to do was to come to ABC and say, hey, I have this thing. These other guys are working on it too. Why don't you come work on it with us? And we can all work on it together. We can be what BCH is supposed to be. We can collaborate on a shared goal. And I was hoping that that was going to be a way that we could like defuse the tensions that had blown up during the IFP. And yeah, I find it really sad that that isn't what happened. That's
No,
that
it's not.
the fear like rode the option for something good. And even though like I came in with the hope to fix things in a in a manner of reconciliation, it ended up being that I fixed things in a matter of irreversible splitting. So
Yeah, I think that's right. And so you participate in the first DAA meeting with the future of Bitcoin Cash, and that is one of the largest that I had seen in quite some time for Bitcoin Cash. Regardless of the issue, there was at least a dozen guys there, and really interesting. Seemed like it was a fairly productive discussion. People walked away from it feeling good. And then in between that first meeting and a scheduled second meeting, ABC and Sachet come out with Grasberg. What did you immediately think after all the conversations and talking and your proposal and the debates, and what were your thoughts?
yeah, so I had expected something vaguely like this. I didn't expect exactly what happened, and there were a lot of things about Grasberg that shocked me and frankly pissed me off. So what I had expected was a proposal from Omri, from Bitcoin ABC's lead dev, for explaining why he thought that historical drift correction should be part of the DAA fix. I expected this because early on in the discussions in the work group, both he and Carl had mentioned that Omri considered it a requirement to fix the historical drift that had happened. So I mentioned like the EDA, when Bitcoin Cash was first created, there was that really nasty oscillation caused by the algorithm that produced those 300-second blocks. So that created about 200, I think, or sorry, 2,000, 1,800-ish hours of accumulated drift, and also issued a huge number of coins, of excess coins, to the miners who were active at that time. And that was, a dark spot on Bitcoin Cash's history. There was also the 8 years of drift that happened since the Genesis block from the Bitcoin core or Bitcoin difficulty adjustment algorithm, because that one was not targeting 600 seconds either. That was actually getting around 560, I think, seconds on average. So those two drifts were things, and I thought that we should not fix them. I thought that the past is the past, and once we go down the path of changing the past, there's no telling what can happen. But I didn't really think about it that much, and I just basically told him, hey, I think that if you propose this, this is going to be controversial. It's going to cause people to get bogged down in fighting over this, and it's going to result in flame wars and nothing ever getting done. So I told him that I didn't consider the historical drift requirement to be a valid requirement. I did not consider that amendment to be a friendly amendment to my proposal. And I told him that if he considered it a requirement for him, that he should propose it to the community and try to convince the community on it, and that I would not do that for him because I didn't think that it could win, that I didn't think it would work. So I expected him to do that proposal. But what he did with the Grasberg DAA was not a proposal. It was not suggesting, hey, we should do historical drift correction. The Grasberg DAA was a concrete implementation that competed with mine, and which was not a proposal but a conclusion. The announcement article said, Bitcoin ABC is therefore moving forward with the Grasberg DAA. And so that didn't seem to be what Omri and I had talked about. It seemed to be a very different move, and one which was using his and Bitcoin ABC's personal weight and strength and political clout in order to bypass my proposal. And the other thing that really bothered me about this was that in the first paragraph of his announcement, he stated that at this time, no concrete proposals had reached Bitcoin ABC.
Right.
Which I found to be simply false and a lie. And not only did I find that, but pretty much everybody else on Reddit and everybody else in the development community of Bitcoin Cash also found that to be a lie. It did not seem excusable. There's like one thin grain of perspective in which you can possibly justify it, but it's such a stretch that nobody, except for like the hardest of hardcore ABC fans, took their statement seriously. Like the one thing that I didn't do was the concrete proposal that I had not been submitted to the reviews.bitcoincash.org website. I hadn't submitted it to their specific nodes team. I'd submitted it to the Bitcoin Cash community as a whole.
Right.
And like, I don't think that's how things should be done. Should I also submit it to BCHD? Should I also submit it to MEF? Like,
right.
There's some steps that they need to take for themselves.
Well, we just arrive at the crux, as we have really from the beginning of this conversation. The crux of what I think is the debate is how decisions are made and who calls those shots. And so the Grasberg DAA comes out, and then we're sort of lost on, and I'm using that loosely for literary effect. The community is kind of lost on coin emission, drift, things that a lot of the less technical guys like myself are just having to kind of grapple with and kind of get into the weeds and so on. And then there's another developer meeting after that, and I thought, well, this is going to be, I think it was, I want to say July 27th or something, and
yeah, something like that.
Yeah, and I was like, this is going to be interesting. Like, this is going to be a really interesting, there's a working group that's on Telegram, also put together by fellows like Shama Chancellor and Mangarian, Anthony Zegers from ABC, and Shama formerly from ABC. So there's a lot of synergy going on, and now there are two proposals. And from the outside looking in, I think sort of the regular sort of casual tourist could be excused for, okay, well, there are two proposals, let the best one sort of win out, however that's determined, however the nerds and the geeks flesh that out. But something happened at the very last developer meeting that caused you, again, and I've only really, you've been on my radar for just a couple of years, so forgive me if I mischaracterize you here, but for the most part, when I see you post anywhere, it's very not that you're not being careful here, but it's careful language. There's, you try to be generous and hand off.
Dispassionate, perhaps.
Right. Okay, I'll just say it this way: it's kind of your posts are cold and just the facts, man. Here's what's going on. After that. So I'm going to let you kind of get in, because you were at that what effectively I think is the last DAA meeting. I could be wrong, but
There's three.
Right.
It was a series of three.
Right. You post Dark Secrets of the Grasberg DAA after that meeting, and something happened in that meeting that I think, unless you had this in your head that you were going to write this from the get-go, which in my cinematic heart of hearts here, I want to say you didn't, but I have no proof of that. So I think something happened in that meeting that I heard that caused you to go, okay, that's it, guys. You've released JT, so you knew Jonathan Toomim, but now you're going to get JT. And how am I doing so far with characterizing? Because it's definitely a different tone from the last couple of years, right?
There was a switch. There was something that changed. It was not at the developer meeting. The developer meeting was long after that switch had changed. The switch was basically when I was about 1/3 of the way through reading the Grasberg DAA announcement. That's when I started to get angry, and it took me a long time to not be angry. For the first few days after the Grasberg DAA thing was announced, I was really struggling to not weigh in with my personal opinion on Grasberg and to try to allow Omni's proposal to reach a fair audience and to let the Bitcoin Cash community weigh in on it themselves. And so when I interjected, it was either to say, hey, code is there. There was a proposal to address the manner in which Omri had made the announcement, or to interject very specific facts that I thought were missing from the proposal, and which I thought seemed to be either very neglectful or intentionally misleading omissions. So things like the 11.25 minute block time that we're going to be experiencing, or we were going to be experiencing for several years, that was not mentioned in the Grasberg announcement. So I thought that that was a sufficiently factual and dispassionate thing that I could point that out. But other than that, I tried not to interject with any actual criticisms to the public. That said, I did find it to be acceptable to state my criticisms in the Telegram working group and to the developer meeting. But after about a week of that, so I think the Grasberg article was on Wednesday that was published, the announcement. Around Friday or so of the next week, it was clear that the dust was not settling. There was not a conclusion being made. There was continuous strife, and the neutrality that I had been trying to maintain, I'll admit unsuccessfully, I was not completely neutral, but the holding of myself back, at that point I decided that it was actually making a split more likely, not less likely. Mm-hmm. And so I decided to try to settle the matter.
And Grasberg was presented, so if people are listening to Jonathan's language, which he chooses words very carefully, whereas I just kind of fling them around wherever I find them, he's hitting on words like collaborative and so on, and that has been a constant bromide against ABC for as long as I can remember. And so Grasberg was presented almost in a like fitting the stereotype of ABC. And I don't have the language in front of me, but we're moving forward with this.
We are moving forward with the Grasberg DA. Bitcoin ABC is moving forward with the Grasberg
right.
DA.
Thank you. Yeah. And thanks so long, and thanks for the fish. And that's an interesting tactic to take. And I saw it, so without even reading it or understanding its technicals, I was like, that language was strategic. That was chosen on purpose.
Yeah.
Do you think so?
It seemed like a snub. It seemed like an intentional snub.
Or to try to trigger, right?
And it also seemed like an attempt to set a shelling point. If you want to avoid a split, the way to do that is to side with the side that has the most power and the most decisiveness. My side was giving forth a proposal. His side was giving forth a conclusion. Therefore, if you want to maintain unity and prevent the currency's value from tanking, you should all side with the side that has unity. Mm-hmm. And the side that has unity also did solve the problem that we were setting out to solve. It does actually fix the oscillations, or at least most of them. So not only do you get oscillations, but you also get this side benefit of historical drift correction and future drift correction. So yeah, it seemed to be very much an attempt to spin the issue and to consolidate power, basically.
So I have a nice rapport with Amaury Sachet of ABC, and I find him to just be a peach from a journalistic point of view. So I don't have to work with him on a protocol level or try to do business with him necessarily. So I find him to be very accessible. Anytime I want him on, he comes on. I need a quote, he's there, and he's willing to speak with me. So that is a long way to go to say I asked him about Grasberg, and I don't think he would mind me saying this. And I said, "Hey, he, at least to me, for whatever this is worth, he really thought Grasberg was better." And again, from my outside, I'm trying to handicap this and try to play it straight down the middle. I saw Grasberg as a really interesting game theory strategic choice. And I was like, he is on purpose, and I did not say this to him, he is on purpose trying to trigger these guys. Like, something's going on here. So your article, your, I'll just call it Dark Secrets, comes out on read.cash, and after just a blistering deconstruction of Grasberg, you have this really interesting paragraph, which it's Jonathan Toomim trying to talk sense into JT, right? So here's the paragraph. I want to read it. Amaury Sachet has done good things for Bitcoin Cash in the past. In 2017, he and Free Trader created Bitcoin Cash, and Amaury has worked hard for 3 years to maintain Bitcoin Cash's most popular full node, and to keep the code secured against attack. He helped us free ourselves from control of Blockstream after they transitioned Bitcoin's economy to a high fee constrained block size regimen, and attempted to push Bitcoin's users towards Blockstream's own product, Liquid. For his help with that, we will always be grateful to Amaury. So that is like, other than there's another part of this where you say, hey, if they want to come back and help us or whatever, that's fine. But that's the lone concession. You are setting it like, hey, I don't want to just brigade this guy. This is he's valuable. Did you choose that strategically, or did it just come naturally in the course of your thinking?
Both. So there's in classic rhetoric, there's a form for how essays are written. There's like the refutatio. There's the addressing of the other side of the issue. And like if I didn't say that, people would bring that up because it is a valid point and it's an important point. But it's also something that I think I actually do like Amaury a lot. I think that he's a brilliant guy and he's done a lot of amazing things for Bitcoin Cash. But unfortunately, for whatever reason, he doesn't work as a leader for Bitcoin Cash. So I think it's important to remember that, like, even if a person is a good person, they can be really bad at a certain role. And I wanted to make sure that when we think of Amaury, we don't think of him as an enemy. We just think of him as a friend who needed to be helped in the hardest way possible. He needed to be moved into a role in which he was not a harm to others, and in which he was not in a perpetual state of fear and games. Like, I think that a lot of what's going on with Amaury is actually that he is perpetually afraid of security bugs in the code. He's perpetually afraid of government actors or operatives from other coins that want to see Bitcoin Cash fail. He's always afraid that somebody is going to attack or something is going to happen to destroy his creation. And so I think a lot of the behavior that he takes makes a lot of sense within that light. For example, the stonewalling of projects and proposals makes a lot of sense when you see that as being afraid of bugs or afraid of mistakes having been made by another person. The way that he responded to me was something that makes a lot of sense if you think that he believed that BCHN, for example, was the result of an enemy operation, maybe BSV funding somebody in order to try to cause splits.
For sure.
And in this framework, the only way in which he can trust any code is if either he writes it or somebody that he absolutely trusts has written it. And this makes him very skeptical of outside contributions. And I think that that results in the perception that other people have said that he has non-invented hero syndrome, that he can only accept his own code because it's what he believes. And I think that, yeah, that probably comes out of fear.
I think that's probably the best insight I have ever heard about how ABC operates. And as you were talking, I'm going through all my private discussions in my head with various ABC people, and I think just about everything you've said is true. And I'm the opposite of that in my personal constitution. I tend to be naive. I tend to be almost an ingenue, where I'll try to talk to anybody about anything, and I sort of assume they have a good
assume good faith.
Right. And so we often, with the ABC guys, I often talk past them, and to a lesser degree, just because BCHN hasn't been around that long, comparatively, with the BCHN guys as well. But I'll often stumble into these arguments, and I'll be like, where is this coming from? Like, I'm just asking this question, and then I'll start to get all this sort of conspiratorial thing. Oh, you're here for this, or you're trying to feel this out. And I think I'm glad you said that. Well, I'm glad you added that paragraph, and I'm glad we talked about it, because it's not sexy enough for most people to pull out and go, hey, And I've actually heard Emergent Reasons. Again, I don't think he would get upset at this, but I was asking him recently, John Neary, about sort of the ongoings, and I might have made a joke or something in poor taste, and he said, look, it's not funny. Like, this is a friend of ours, and he kind of went into this thing where almost exactly what you said in spirit right now, that he's kind of gone the wrong way. And I read it, and I was like, that is incredibly sweet. And he didn't know what to do with that. I think he's so used to the online debate of you're a dick, you're a cuck, and all this other stuff, that we actually had a moment where I was like, hey, that's a really good way to frame that. And we talked a little bit about emotional intelligence, and he teased me about it. But yeah, that's a really interesting insight. So with all of that maturity that you've tried to enter into the discussion, I want to get into some of the darker parts here. So just to bring us back. Go ahead.
I would like to continue on this a little bit more.
Yeah, go.
Because I think that the cryptocurrency community has often worked with adversarial thinking, and we've often needed to think about all of the attacks that can be done and to prevent those attacks. And there's a healthy amount of paranoia that is needed in order to do that kind of thinking well, and Domri has that. And so I think that's one of the things that has made him good. But as a community, we've been having some issues between balancing the need for thinking about attacks and thinking about the possibility of shills or sybils, and the need to just get along with each other and to interact well. And there's a fundamental conflict between the principle of assume good faith, which is part of the code of conduct for basically every open source development organization that exists, and the need for adversarial thinking. How do you reconcile those two things? And I think that something that's actually starting to happen in the Bitcoin Cash space right now, and which is, I think, incredibly important, is that we're grappling with that, and we're realizing that we need to find ways to get along with people and to resolve these conflicts, and to understand that, like, if somebody bites your hand, that doesn't mean they're attacking necessarily. It just might mean that they're afraid, or maybe you made some misstep or something. And we need to work on these systems for resolving disagreements and for diffusing them and for basically getting along. So yeah, that's something that I'm looking forward to seeing Bitcoin Cash develop from here on out. And I think that if we do that, then perhaps we can actually have a healthy development environment. We can start building, we can start doing all the things that we've always wanted to do, and we can avoid repeats of this situation.
Yeah. Here.
So with that said, let's go to the dark stuff.
Let's go ahead and trash this dude. And I'm joking. That's me talking. So what happens now? I think part 12 of Dark Secrets is, to my mind, what is going to be quoted, if it hasn't already been, from here into eternity. So you say there's no coming back from this for Bitcoin ABC as an organization. This is the end of life for Bitcoin ABC. Now, I've seen talk like that in one form or another in various Telegram groups. I've seen it in Reddit, just about everywhere. Amaury, you're fired, and we're going to fire Amaury, and we're going to fire ABC. This comes at the end of just an incredible essay that's super interesting, and I think even people who aren't particularly fond of you at the moment for whatever reason would say, yeah, that essay kind of it does what it's supposed to do.
Yeah, if I said that as like point 1, people wouldn't believe it, but it's point 12.
Point 12.
Yeah.
And you have a bunch of steps here. Basically you would call on every business miner in the ecosystem to stop running ABC. People can read it for themselves, but revoke funding, make your claims public and clearly about ABC and Grasberg. This is, this changes in just a second, but and then you say, again, here's the incredibly sweet part. If you can offer jobs to the ABC guys, that's great, and you include Sachet in that.
As a developer, but not as a manager.
Exactly. So this gets out. I hit you with, I say, please, Jonathan, I beg you, take pity on me. Come on the podcast. It's been a year and change. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about this essay. And you message me in the wee hours, and you say, all right, Jesus, just to get you off my back, I'll do it. And then a few hours later, what happens?
I actually don't remember. Like I like the things hitting the public and the things hitting my attention were
Sure.
different times.
Well,
so
within hours of this going out, ABC and Sachet accept your ACERT, and they implement, or they propose that or I have to be so careful. But anyway, they're going to they say they're going to implement an 8% code base reward redirection.
I'm just going to call it's a tax.
Okay. But the point being that this is hours after your essay goes live, basically, arguably the most prominent, I know you don't call yourself a developer necessarily, but arguably the most prominent dev in the game right now from the BCHN side in terms of having street cred and respect from everybody, says there is no coming back for this from ABC as an organization. This is the end of life. I wonder, and I haven't asked him about this, but I wonder if he saw that, read it, or people quoted it back to him, if Amaury just said, all right, F it, let's just do this now. It's time now to pull the trigger. And so, interestingly enough, the Toomim Lundeberg Assert gets in as the DAA, but then the IFP, under slightly more vague circumstances, comes back or returns with an 8% redirection. So,
I would like to correct you on the timeline a little bit, but
go.
Yeah. So it's currently Friday at 4 p.m. on the time of this filming recording. I published my article at something like 11 a.m. on Monday. On Wednesday, I think, an announcement was made, signed by every lead dev of every full node implementation except for Bitcoin ABC, saying that they are going forward with AS33, my proposal, and Mark's proposal, and Jacob's and Zowi's and whatever, my team's proposal, is getting adopted by every single full node and most wallets and most of the critical infrastructure of Bitcoin Cash. So basically that's a statement saying that it is ABC versus everybody else. And then the next day after that was the announcement.
Okay, good.
From Bitcoin ABC. Yeah, and so then diving into that. So they compromised by saying, okay, we'll go ahead with your S33 algorithm. And then they just revoked that compromise by saying, but we're still going to split. Like the IFP thing is a way for them to split. The specific requirements in their Coinbase rule is that every Coinbase, every block mined must include an 8% payout to an unspecified address, which we may guess might be Omri Sachets or Bitcoin ABCs or maybe some intermediate fund. But in any case, a fund that ABC decides and nobody else has any say in. And because it's a requirement for every block to contain that, and any block that does not contain it will be ignored by ABC, this is effectively an attempt at a soft fork. Depending on which, or depending on how much hash rate supports this, this is either a user-activated soft fork, or this is a 51% attack. So the only way for there not to be a chain split now is for it to be a successful 51% attack against BCHN and BU and BCHD and etc. Most likely what's going to happen is it's going to be a user-activated soft fork. So I think this sounds like a commitment to having a split. So that suggests that, hey, maybe they wanted to split this whole time. In my Dark Secrets article, point 6, well, point 2 and point 6 suggested something kind of similar to this. So in point 2, I mentioned that the biggest philosophical issue with Grasberg was that it changes the coin emission schedule. Right now, we are emitting 900 BCH per day. With Grasberg, for the next 4 years until the next halving, that would be reduced to 800 BCH per day. So that changes the inflation rate, and that opens the question, who benefits, who suffers as a result of that economic policy change? And if there is somebody who benefits strongly enough, they might have a financial incentive to want to enact that change. And again, going into adversarial thinking, if there is an attack possible, then we, as developers, need to change or structure the rules of the system to make that attack either non-profitable or impossible. And in the case of this attack, this is a political attack, potential political attack, in which a rogue developer could accept a bribe or could be coerced by threat of violence, by like a $5 wrench attack, to add some code to the protocol that would benefit some mysterious shady actor. And that would be something along the lines of a bribe or an organized crime racket or something that we probably prefer not to have in a currency that's supposed to be worldwide, free, uncorruptible, uncensorable electronic cash. So I thought that we should take the possibility of that threat very seriously, even if there is no specific evidence saying that that's exactly what's going on in this case. And because it's possible, we should make it impossible. That was 0.6. Then comes Wednesday or Thursday, and the announcement is made, and Bitcoin ABC basically just comes out and says that they are taking over the protocol for their own economic interest. And that was one of the really surprising things to me, that they just went out and said, hey, you know that 0.6 that you were doing? Well, screw it. We're just going to do it. We're just going to take it. We're going to do it explicitly, and we're going to not hide it. We're just going to say that we deserve 8% of all mining revenue for Bitcoin Cash. And that was actually, that was the thing that surprised me the most.
It was, I kept saying wow and holy F and stuff when I read it, because I don't know what I was expecting. I think I'd become such an observer that I just kind of sat back and sort of let things play out in front of me. I don't know what I'm supposed to do, but I'm saying I'd sort of become dull now to new announcements. And the Grasberg thing and the DAA was so technical that it lost a lot of us non-tech guys, the journalist side of it. And this was something I could sink my teeth into. And I was like, oh, this is it. So from my perspective, looking at it as someone who is, I guess, sympathetic to BCHN and was mildly against the IFP, although I never stated it publicly, and someone's tried to kind of cover it down the middle, the 8% looks to me almost like what you said. So I'm going to skip over the politics and the attack and tax and stuff like that. It seems to me, and you're more than welcome to come back to any of that, he's basically saying, look, I've had enough, and I'll give you a quick analogy. A friend of mine needed some legal help, and he had some money, and he called a lawyer. And he's kind of an obnoxious guy, my friend is, and he was quoted a price, thousands of dollars for his case. And he came back and he said, look, the lawyer said I had all these great points and all this other stuff, but this is way beyond what I was anticipating. And I said, well, here's how this works, brother. He didn't want to deal with you. So he's going to deal with you, but it's going to cost you a premium to deal with you. So that's kind of how I'm looking at Bitcoin ABC. I think, again, I have no insight. This is just me looking out, so I'm not revealing something or tipping a hand or signaling or anything like that. It's Amaury and ABC going, you know what? These guys have so much momentum. Everybody's kind of going over there and doing this stuff. Let's just tip the hand now. It's time. Let's just do it. It's going to cost you 8%, and I think even that figure can be fudged a little bit with regard to, I guess, some of the math. But it's going to cost you 8% going forward to deal with us. And he has said in everywhere, he's never ever hidden it, that he's tired of giving away software for free. And so I'm kind of trying to steel man him a little bit here. And so he's like, look, I've been doing this work. You guys get the benefit of it, and the incentives are aligned perfectly now with regard to the software and the miners. And if they want to mine it, they can. And if they don't, there's now there's a viable alternative. Where's my thinking wrong?
This is actually a really funny situation that we find ourselves in. So you say you mildly opposed the IFP. I supported it openly.
I didn't even think to ask.
Yeah, like I posted on Reddit, and I actually had online disagreements with my brother on this, because he strongly opposed the IFP and I strongly supported it. But after a few days of debate on the IFP, I'm like, okay, so there are these issues. It really shouldn't be 3 addresses. It should be a whitelist, and miners should be allowed to donate amongst them as they see fit. And oh, wait a minute, you excluded Bitcoin Unlimited from that whitelist? what the hell, man? Like, they're definitely the second most important. And so, there's like these things that I didn't like. Oh, and by the way, 12% is 12.5% coincidental number there. 12.5% is too much. You should do less, like, I don't know, 2 to 3%, something like that. And after a couple weeks of this, I realized that my opinion was definitely in the minority, and that was fine. And so I said, hey, I kind of support the idea. I think there are a few issues still with the implementation. I think those could be solved, but it doesn't matter because the Bitcoin Cash community has clearly come out on the side of no IFP. And I think that that's actually not an awful decision. There are other ways of funding infrastructure development, and if the Bitcoin Cash community wants to go down that path, I'm willing to explore where it leads. So yeah, that was I think some piece of context that you are missing, because like I think that yes, taxes, I'm using that word intentionally, are often a good thing, but they have to be done consensually with representation, and they have to be done without corruption for a public good. And there was a case to be made for those things in the original proposal, but in the subsequent attempts that either hypothetically ABC could have been making according to Section 6, or very explicitly made with their most recent 8% tax, those are non-consensual, those are not supported by the majority, those are grift. So ultimately what we had is Grassberg was an algorithm that was supposed to do drift protection, but now we have a social algorithm of kicking out ABC intended to do grift protection.
That is a twist I did not see coming. I really didn't, and I'm so glad you said it here. Wow, that is amazing. Okay, so go ahead.
Other point. Yeah, I think that one of the interesting things about this issue is that, like you were saying, 8% in order to deal with us. I think actually it's the other way around. I think one of the reasons why ABC has had so much trouble getting support or getting work done, getting the resources that they need, is because they are hard to deal with, and they burn through developers like mad. It's a long list of people who have tried to collaborate with ABC and have burned out or have had falling outs with Omri and have left. And this is probably actually one of the reasons why Bitcoin Cash has such a decentralized development environment. It's because there was a centralized entity that almost nobody could get along with. And so that everybody who was doing it for fun left and started their own project. And so like we've got Tom Zander starting first Classic and then Flowy, and we've got Tom Harding doing XT. We've got Free Trader, who was the other OG of Bitcoin Cash, starting the Bitcoin Cash node. Kalen also tried to work with ABC early on, and he moved away. Mark Lunderberg basically left the community for 6 months because of ABC. I tried to contribute to ABC, and I have pretty thick skin, but I couldn't find it to be a productive and engaging thing. And like, I think what happens is that the only people that can tolerate working in that environment are the people that get paid pretty well to do it. And that makes the requirement for ABC to have a lot of funding. So basically, I think that the 12.5%, 8%, 2.5%, 5%, whatever the IFPs have all been basically convincing people to deal with Omri's poor management style, and that's the dev tax is to pay for the bad leader.
That's another interesting way to frame it in the analysis, and I've heard variations on that theme, but I like the way that you're thinking there. And I, in my talks with Amaury over the years, I don't think he would disagree so much. This is what's so fascinating, is that I don't think I think he would laugh at a lot of it, and I think he would say, "Yeah, you're probably right about this and that and the other thing." And there was a an anecdote that Shama Chancellor, who has become a bit of a pit bull on this issue, former Bitcoin ABC dev, who, again, all this is public, I'm not telling tales out of school, left ABC for, he cited personal conflicts with Omri, but came back more recently to work on the project again, not ABC, but Bitcoin Cash through various means. And he's sort of serving as the resident apologist for the current ABC mode of operandi. And he told me, or he was talking publicly about Omri's leadership style. He said one time they were in Tokyo, and he said because Omri had been there for years and knew the city like the back of his hand, that he was going to lead a bunch of the guys around the city. And they said they turned around and Omri was gone and never looked back. And he said that's kind of his leadership style, where he just kind of goes on and does his thing and hopes that you will follow along. So that's really interesting. And so we're now at this interesting crossroads, I think, because at least on social media, and according to the read.cash posts I see, a great deal of the mining community is behind what I'll kind of lump together as the BCHN crew, and a handful of guys and gals are with Bitcoin ABC. But the community, however you want to define that, at least in the West, in the English-speaking West, is for sure. I mean, I can't believe it would even be contested, but the juice is, the social juice anyway, is with BCHN. So getting ready for the August 15th features freeze for ABC. It is again a soft fork, as you laid out. Let me get your predictions, if you don't mind making them. I can't imagine you haven't thought this through in your head. How does this work out going into November? If you don't mind me asking, putting you on the spot, I didn't say I would ask you this. Take us through the game theory, or how you see this playing out. If you want to just say, I hope this and hope that, or for someone who's caught in between and doesn't really understand all the intricacies of everything,
Yep.
give us your future prediction. What happens to Bitcoin Cash?
Yeah, so I used the phrase 51% attack if Omri somehow has a lot of hash rate. I've done a little bit of digging around, and definitely the English-speaking mining community is fairly dead set against him and set in favor of the non-ABC side. I'm not calling it the BCHN side. It's the it's BCH minus ABC.
Fair enough.
But yeah, like there's about maybe 2 exahashes or so of hash rate in the United States, Canada, mostly, that has explicitly come out in support of the true BCH, not ABC side. The Chinese community is still being standoffish, and so now I'm trying to get them on board. So you might have heard about Bitcoin Cat.
Sure did.
So Hypo Yang has decided that he also wants to fork, but
So hold on. Hypo Yang is the founder, CEO of Via BTC mining pool, and also the exchange CoinEx. Keep going.
Correct. And he is also the person who coined the term Bitcoin Cash.
Right.
In case people didn't know that. So yeah, Hypo Yang has come out in favor of a fork, a hard fork, a mutually incompatible fork with replay protection. So no matter what, there will be no hash war. There's just no conflict on that respect. So it will split. And he calls it Bitcoin Cat because cats are cute and pretty to look at and not threatening unless you're a bird or a mouse. in which case they're violent murder machines, of course. But yeah, so like, and you know, he's come up with a bunch of ideas that he wants to add to Bitcoin Cat, some of which are things that the mining community has been asking for a long time, like a reduction in block time, although I think he goes very much too far. He's suggesting a 30-second block time. You know, the name Bitcoin Cat is similar to Bitcoin Cash, and it can be abbreviated to BCC, which is the old ticker that Bitcoin Cash used to have before people realized that it was not a good idea to share a ticker with something that was clearly a Ponzi scheme.
Right.
The BitConnect coin was like something that I will admit without any guilt that I profited off of immensely. Yeah, so I had bought a bunch of Litecoin miners or script miners, and because of the Ponzi scheme and the promises that they were making, BitConnect coin was extremely profitable to mine.
Yeah.
So I just mined on a multi-pool that automatically converted it into Litecoin, and didn't have to deal with their Ponzi scheme, and just like, yeah, it was like I think 20% more profitable on average than straight Litecoin mining.
So some people have said that Hypo and Bitcoin Cat is a troll, and further they've said that it's kind of an okey doke, kind of like if you're running in an election, and the constituency is largely Latino, you're a white guy, and your opponent is Latino, you go ahead and grab a Latino candidate that you run as well to sort of split the Latino vote. Does that make any sense?
I don't think it's that, no.
Okay.
I think it's a troll in the same way that Dogecoin was a troll.
Right.
Like at the time that Dogecoin was created, cryptocurrency was just starting to get like really intense, and things were heating up, and real money was starting to get involved, and people were starting to, you know, shill and fight over which coin was the one true altcoin. Of course, like Bitcoin dominance was still massive at the time, and Dogecoin came around and turned cryptocurrency into a meme, turned it into a joke, and like it got a lot of popularity because it was a joke. But at the same time, it was also a real project. It was a real cryptocurrency. It was the one of the fastest cryptocurrencies at the time, and it had some real uses in microtransactions, in like doing internet tipping. So ultimately, like Dogecoin never took off, and I don't think anybody ever expected it to. But it wasn't just some joke. It was a joke with some substance. And part of the effect of Dogecoin was that it influenced the culture of the cryptocurrency community, and I think it got everybody to just chill out and treat this as something that should be fun, instead of something that we need to panic over whenever we see a red bar on the exchange rates. So I think that is probably what Hypo is aiming for. And
but your
one of
point
the
is
things
that
that
Bitcoin Cash is going to fork.
yeah, so if anybody mines on ABC, and if not, like, if less than about 70% mine on ABC, then there will be a fork, a chain split. There's always going to be a fork. There's, you know, forks actually just mean when the consensus rules change.
Gotcha.
So every protocol upgrade, every 6 months, there is technically a hard fork. Most of the time, they are hard forks in which one of the branches of that fork has basically an empty set of blocks. There's just nothing there. But there is the concept of the possibility of another chain continuing in that direction. So the question is, are we going to have a chain split? Are we going to see two chains continuously extended?
And as a frame of reference to your question, like, is it going to be like BSV, BCH, and that little war?
Like, in order for that to happen, Amelie would have to have a popular idea, and he just doesn't. The reason that BSV persists to this day is because in the BCH-BSV split, both sides were wrong. there was valid criticisms that the BSV side had about BCH and how things were being conducted, and there were valid criticisms that BCH had about the Bitcoin SV side about how they wanted to conduct their things. And there was actually merit in both approaches, but there was a lot more merit in the BCH side. So that's why our side had the majority. But one of the big criticisms that I agreed with when the BSV crowd made it was that the Bitcoin ABC side was led by a quote benevolent end quote dictator, that it was authoritarian, that Amelie did not know how to lead well, that he was abrasive, that he was hard to get along with, and that he stonewalled scaling. And especially on that last point, I think those are valid criticisms. I think that not only has he stonewalled scaling, but he's stonewalled a lot of stuff, including the DAA, including whatever. And with that in mind, like, I don't see a side that's run by Amaury with that 8% tax and with the behavior that has come to light over the last month. I don't see that that's going to be a popular chain. Like, it might be 5%, it might be 10, it might be 2% that fizzles out and hits 0. But just from a practical perspective, I just don't expect that much out of it. If it does turn out to be something that's big, that's fine. The main objection that I have to the IFP is really that it was tried to be applied to a community without that community's consent. And the Zcash team, for example, had the mining fund, or sorry, the development fund out of mining baked into the protocol from day 0. It was always in the protocol. It was a fundamental part of their value proposition. They would always have a development team that was well funded. And when you have that as part of the foundational social contract, then it becomes fine. But he was trying to impose it onto the entire Bitcoin Cash community, and I think that that's not fine. So, if he wants to go ahead with, with fait accompli, so if he wants to go forward with that, with his own project, and try to get miners to mine it and try to get users to use it, that's fine. I'm okay with that. I don't want his coin to fail or anything. I just don't want him to make Bitcoin Cash fail along with it. So.
And that was my ultimate question then.
Oh yeah, and there's also the technical stuff that you didn't remind me about that I do need to answer. So yeah, how does it play out? So currently, Bitcoin ABC and Bitcoin Cash Node both have a rule that marks blocks as being final and not reorgable once 10 blocks have been mined on top of it, the 10-block finalization rule. And this means that if there is a split, and let's say that the hard fork, that is the consensus rule activation, happens at block 1000. So block 1001A is going to be block ABC. 1001B is going to be block BCH, and those two chains will compete. If the ABC side gets longer than the BCH side by, it's actually a variable threshold, but it's around 1.5 to 2.5 blocks, then the ABC side will reorg out the BCH side, and the BCH side will just join onto the ABC side and start extending their chain. But as soon as they do that, they will mine a block that doesn't pay out the IFP, which means that fork will happen again, it'll start again. So if the two chains have roughly equal hash rate, there is the possibility for this little race thing to happen until the BCH side eventually gets 10 blocks ahead. And then once that happens, the split gets set in stone, and both chains go on their merry way forever. So the worst case scenario would be kind of where it's roughly 50-50 on hash rate, or if ABC has more. But there's some really easy ways to just prevent this from happening entirely. For example, we can say that whatever address that Omri puts into his code, we can just say that the first fork block cannot contain a Coinbase to that address. And we're not blacklisting the address permanently, we're just saying that this first block has to be a fork, and ABC has to go their way, and we have to go our way. So that just makes the split cleaner. We can also do this without that rule and just say, hey, miners, you know, the 2 exahashes from the US and Canada plus whatever we want to get from China, why don't you just make sure that we mine 10 blocks before ABC? And I expect that to be pretty easy. Easy enough that I'm considering that we don't even bother to implement this this hard fix, this code fix. But you know, we kind of just need to talk about the options we have with the community and decide which of the options are most consistent with our principles and our risk tolerance, and make a decision from there. So we've got a lot of options to make sure that this happens cleanly.
And the ever important question on the exchange side, on the speculation side, where does the ticker symbol go?
I think that that question doesn't matter. Like a rose by any other name would smell as sweet. I think that we should be talking about substance and not familiarity. It's not what I would pay attention to. A lot of other people will disagree. I think that, you know, so I also, by the way, I don't have a very common perspective on things. I don't really care about like getting rich and having lots of money. Like I care about the concept of peer-to-peer electronic cash and what it can do for society. And I'm interested in it because I think that it can make it so that my children have to grow up in a place that is a little bit less, I'm not sure if I can swear on this, but a little less bad, a little less blank up, if you know what I mean. And
yeah,
that potential is what interests me, not whether I can get a Lamborghini. And you know, the name, if we have a change of name, sure, that might, in the short term, slow down our brand recognition. And it might cause a short-term drop in our market cap. And you know, like if you're running a publicly traded company, it's nice to not have the stock crash, because when that happens, people complain about how you're a terrible person and how they want to murder your dog. And sure, I get that. Like, it's nice to not do damage to people's short-term livelihood. But we really need to pay attention to the long game here. And what matters more here is the precedent that Bitcoin Cash is setting, and the changes in how we govern ourselves, the changes in how we develop, and the economic stand that we are making for defending the currency and defending the economic principles, the monetary issuance schedule, as being something that is truly immutable. Because this is like something that, you know, the Bitcoin core community has been complaining about for ages. If you change the block size, then what prevents you from changing the 21 million coin limit? What prevents you from inflating the currency and right, continuing issuance forever? And I'll tell you what prevents that. It's the community. It's because those things will cause exactly the kind of drama, and it will cause exactly the kind of immune system response in which the community attacks any dev who attempts that. And I think that this puts that argument hopefully to rest. I mean, it's not like guaranteed that this will happen every time, but as long as we maintain internal vigilance, I think we can maintain economic freedom. So I think that's a much more important precedent than the name. And I've also kind of I think that like one of the things that's been holding Bitcoin Cash back is the fact that it's named Bitcoin Cash. Like our name still defines us in opposition to Bitcoin. And whenever we talk about Bitcoin Cash, we always have to say, oh yeah, Bitcoin Cash is not Bitcoin, it's this other thing, or we have to say it's what Bitcoin should have been, or we have to be dishonest and say it is Bitcoin, and this other thing is also Bitcoin. There's just like that huge mess, and it's not a very clean conversation. So it might actually be time for a name change anyway, although I would much prefer to have that name change happen in like a year or something like that, when it's not peripheral to this hard fork debate. Because that just leaves the door open for FUD saying that we lost because we lost the name and whatever. It's just, but yeah. So I would like to focus on the things that matter, and the things that matter are the code, the principles, and the community, and especially like the development environment and the expectation of how people will conduct themselves in disagreements. And I have a very optimistic perspective on things from this point on. I think that pretty much, like, I've been seeing a lot more excitement from developers in the last few days about just the technical projects, the technical ideas they've always wanted to implement, but found to be intractable problems because everybody knew that in order to get them approved, they'd have to get them through ABC, and that just didn't seem like an option. Like, for example, I've heard a lot of people chattering about UTXO commitments or UTXO. And those are things that, yeah, I mean, like, maybe they'd happen in 2025 with ABC. They kind of are on the roadmap, but with this parallelized development environment in which devs assume good faith and collaborate and copy each other's code and review each other's code and exchange ideas with data rather than with dictates, I think that we can parallelize that development work and we can get a lot more done in a lot less time. So I think that that's going to be a massive boon for Bitcoin Cash, and that's going to be way bigger of an effect than the name ever did.
Wow. Whew, that was a workout. That was the great Jonathan Toomim. He is currently online. He dislikes Twitter because of the 140 characters and all the rest of it. But he's on
280
Twitter
nowadays.
Yeah, and so if people want to follow your work, what's the best way to follow you?
Reddit.com/r/BTC is a pretty good place to find me. I'm usually there. That's, I think, one of the best development environments. I'm also on Telegram in groups. Yeah, that's mostly it.
Good. Well, I can't thank you enough for this. It's going to be really interesting to see what happens in the future with Bitcoin Cash or whatever it winds up becoming. I really appreciate all the time, all the effort, and explaining all this to listeners. And I'm rooting for you, dude. Thanks so much.
Yeah, this was fun. Let's do it again sometime.